Hey there, BNN viewers. You won't believe the story we have for you today. It's intense and full of unexpected moments. Let's begin today's interesting story. The summer sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm, golden hue over everything it touched. It was a typical July afternoon, the air heavy with the scent of gasoline and the promise of adventure. I was just 11 years old, a child on the cusp of adolescence, and my world was about to change in a way I could never have imagined. My parents and I had pulled into a gas station, the kind that looked like it had seen better days, its faded sign barely illuminating the cracked pavement. The rusty old sedan we drove was a reflection of our lives, worn and weary, yet still moving to the motions of existence. As I stepped out of the car, the heat enveloped me like a thick blanket. I felt the rough concrete beneath my feet as I made my way toward the small convenience store nestled inside the station. I was drawn to the promise of a cold drink and a sweet snack, a tiny reward for enduring the long drive. I remember the clinking sound of the change in my pocket, a simple pleasure that felt monumental in that moment. My heart raced with anticipation as I grabbed a half-melted chocolate bar and a soda, oblivious to the impending storm that would soon engulf my life. But when I returned to the parking lot, my heart sank. The car was gone. At first, I stood there, frozen in disbelief, scanning the area for some sign of my parents. Perhaps they had simply moved to a different pump, I thought, my young mind desperately clinging to hope. Minutes passed, and then hours, each tick clock amplifying the dread creeping into my chest. The world around me grew more sinister as shadows began to stretch and contort in the fading light. Panic surged through my veins, and I clutched the chocolate bar, as if it could somehow shield me from the reality that was sinking in. An older man, the gas station clerk, noticed my distress. He had a kind face, weathered by time, with gentle eyes that seemed to hold a universe of understanding. He opened the door to the store and beckoned me inside, a sanctuary from the gathering darkness outside. I sat on a stool, my hands trembling, not yet comprehending the gravity of my situation. The sweet taste of chocolate turned bitter in my mouth as I waited. Each passing minute felt like an eternity. Eventually, the police were called. They arrived in their crisp uniforms, their faces a mixture of professionalism and concern. They tried to locate my family, but as the hours dragged on, it became painfully evident that I was alone. Just as despair began to take hold, a familiar figure appeared at the door. Mrs. Callahan, the mother of my friend Jamie. She had always been warm yet distant, a figure on the periphery of my life. That night, however, she became my guardian angel, offering me a lifeline when I felt like I was drowning in confusion and fear. Mrs. Callahan took me in with open arms, her kindness wrapping around me like a comforting blanket. I later learned that she and her husband had longed for children of their own, but had faced heartache after heartache in their attempts to start a family. What was intended to be a temporary arrangement soon blossomed into something beautiful. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, as my biological parents' absence transformed from a painful reality to a distant memory. The state eventually declared them unfit, severing their parental rights and sealing my fate as a beloved son to a woman who had chosen me when no one else would. Mrs. Callahan, or Mom as I came to call her, poured her heart into raising me. She was my biggest cheerleader at soccer games, her voice ringing out above the crowd, encouraging me to give it my all. She sat with me at the kitchen table for hours, guiding me through science projects, her patience unwavering even when I struggled. She made sure I never felt like a burden. She taught me that family was not defined by blood, but by the bonds we forged with those who showed up for us when we needed them most. She was my anchor, my lighthouse, illuminating the path forward. As the years ebbed and flowed, life unfolded in ways I could never have imagined. I grew, not just in stature, but in understanding, learning to navigate the complexities of relationships and identity. Then came the day that altered my perspective once more, when my biological grandmother passed away. To my surprise, I learned she had left me her estate. The inheritance was not just a financial gift. It was a beautiful old country house, a relic from a past I had long been disconnected from. I stood there at 25, grappling with the bittersweet reality that this house was a tangible connection to a lineage I had almost forgotten. But just as I began to explore this new chapter, my biological parents reemerged, seemingly out of the ether. It began with a letter, a simple piece of paper that ignited a torrent of emotions I thought I had buried. Then came a phone call, and finally, they stood at my door one afternoon, smiles plastered on their faces, laughter bubbling forth as if the last 14 years had simply evaporated. My father clapped me on the back, his demeanor casual, as if we were old friends catching up. My mother, feigning tears, spoke of how much she had missed me. They told me they had fallen on hard times, that they regretted what they had done. And then there was the mention of my recent good fortune, my inheritance. In that moment, a storm of skepticism raged within me. I felt a deep-rooted anger rising to the surface, a primal instinct to protect the life I had built with Mrs. Callahan. I owed them nothing. Not my time, not my forgiveness, and certainly not a place in my life. Yet, despite the walls I constructed around my heart, a flicker of uncertainty danced within me. After all those years of questioning my worth, of wondering if I had somehow caused their abandonment, now they stood before me, acting like a family that had never left. Mrs. Callahan, wise and perceptive, saw through their facade immediately. That night, as we sat on the porch of my new home, she looked at me with those knowing eyes and reminded me, "Don't owe them anything, sweetheart. Not your money, not your time, and not your heart." Her words resonated deeply, echoing in the chambers of my soul. It took time for me to sort through the tumult of emotions swirling within me. A part of me wanted to unleash years of pent-up rage, to scream at them and demand answers. Another part of me longed to walk away, leaving the past behind once and for all. In the end, I chose to meet with them one last time. It was not out of obligation, but rather a quest for closure. I needed to confront the ghosts of my past, the scars they had left behind. When we sat across from each other, I looked into their eyes, searching for any trace of remorse or understanding. "You did want me when I was a scared, hungry kid at a gas station," I told them, my voice steady and unwavering. "So you don't get me now." Their faces fell, the smiles fading like a mirage. I didn't stay to witness their disappointment or to hear their excuses. I had a real mother, one who had chosen me and loved me fiercely, waiting for me at home. Mrs. Callahan was the one who had given me everything, not out of obligation, but out of pure, unadulterated love. That was the day I made my choice, the day I embraced a family that had chosen me first, the family that had shown me what love truly meant. In that moment, I found my strength, my identity, and my place in the world.